All right, guys, let's take a look at this. So this video is to be a big one. Blizzard version of rotation assist Hakili coming to WoW in patch 11.17. I haven't seen this yet. I would assume this is some type of clickbait. I almost want this to be clickbait. Ian has announced that a rotation assistant is coming to baseline UI. There will be a rotation assist in the base UI that can light up the next button you should press or have a one button keybind for your rotation at a cast of a slightly longer GCD. Ooh, all right, let's take a look. That's crazy.
Welcome to a special edition of WoWcast, where we're going to talk about a patch 11.1.7 feature, and then a broader discussion about add-ons in World of Warcraft in general. I'm Dratnos, World of Warcraft content creator.
I'm Max, I'm the raid leader of Team Liquid, the WoW Guild, and a content creator as well.
And I'm Ian Hazekostas, game director on WoW, and it's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Very excited to be here. So what are we doing in 11.1.7?
A whole bunch of fun stuff, but one of the features that we're extra excited about is a new UI option that we're adding called Rotation Assist, which is really designed to help players who are maybe picking up a new spec or want some guidance on what abilities they should be using when, without having to turn to third.
It's not clickbait. It's real. Rotation Assistance is coming to retail. Wow. I mean, like right away, I'm like, yeah, it's gonna help some people. Like I'm thinking like Peekaboo is gonna love this. It's like, what button do I press next? Okay, boom. I can kind of just hit that button and it's gonna automatically do things for me. Like great. But like, is this a direction the game should be going, right?
Third-party add-ons for it. So we've seen that, there's an add-on called Hakili that is very popular with a lot of players. We're basically building in a very similar version of that into the base UI that you can opt into. That will, no matter what DPS spec you're playing, highlight the recommended next ability given your current energy, what's going on around you, and so forth. One extra thing that we're also going to do, which maybe goes.
Guys, am I out of touch here? Am I out of touch here? This seems terrible. Hold on. Please tell me I'm the one out of touch. Tell me, hey, Xaryu, you're wrong. This is good. Like, what is?
But beyond what the add-ons can do is also have a one-button version of that, where there'll be like a keybind that if you just want almost an auto rotation, you can opt into that, and it will just automatically cast the next recommended ability in the sequence. There'll be a small GCD penalty associated with that, but we want to make sure that this is for accessibility purposes, that it's there for people who maybe just honestly aren't interested in the gameplay of like mastering their spec. They want to explore Azeroth and experience the story, and the mechanics kind of get in the way of that sometimes. This should be for them. Ideally, this is not a tool where someone is like being told by their raid leader to stop trying to DPS manually and just turn on the one button mode to meet some DPS check. That we want to give you the tools to kind of go through that organic progression naturally.
Great.
But so the rotation assist doesn't come with a penalty or anything like that. That's just we're going to show you what your next button is.
Exactly.
Right.
It's very similar to the Hakili add-on. It's kind of reflecting, just the latest kind of established theory crafting, and it's something that we would continue to update, with spec changes and class changes over time. Ideally, it all's born out of the idea that we've seen a valuable tool that players feel like they should be looking outside the game to download, and we'd rather just reduce the barriers to that and make it available to everyone.
Okay, yeah, because there's two parts of it, right? Like the advanced is, I want to really go into this, is the one button thing, but that's not necessarily everyone that's going to use this. Like I think this game, especially new players getting into it, there's a lot going on within a particular class, and you can be a little lost trying to figure out exactly what I should be pressing. So even just using it as like as a guide to start learning your class and move off of it eventually, but just having a base understanding of what actually should I be doing at a base level of this.
That's really exactly the motivation on our end. I mean, especially with warbands and War Within, we see lots and lots more alts, and leveling is pretty quick. You got a bunch of warband until equipped gear that you're passing over to a new character, and just jumping into their full rotation. We've never played the spec seriously before, can be a pretty serious undertaking. And for some people, this may be enough for them, and that's fine too. But we recognize that there's so much, WoW has such a high skill ceiling that just recommending what the next ability isn't going to really remove that or fully solve that. There's still the muscle memory that you need to form, and then all of the nuances of like, we might have a recommendation for a rotation that makes sense if you're fighting a target demi, you're fighting patchwork, but when you need to plan around the fact that you're gonna have to move in 4 seconds, that's a whole different layer of skill that still rests with players.
Yeah, I know when I'm trying to, play.
I'm trying my best to stay open-minded and understand where they're coming from. I'm just like, was anyone asking for this? Is this something that players wanted? I'm just having trouble understanding. I'm really, really struggling here. So I think the goal is the top level players are so much better than the bottom level players. And what WoW is trying to do is squish that difference, right? And one way you could do that is by nerfing the top level players and making it so that you can't download weak auras anymore. And now you have players at more of a similar place skill level, right? Another way you can do it is by buffing all of the noobs by giving them something like this with Hakili or rotations, and now all the noobs are better, and now the gap is smaller. And I think the reason they're trying to reduce this gap is because right now it's never been larger, and the disparity between players has never been larger, and it's hard to cater and give the players what they want when half the audience is saying this content is too easy, we need to go up and up and up, and the other half is saying this is impossibly difficult, and Blizzard's caught in the middle. So I think this is a solution to try to bridge the gap and bring the player base closer together in terms of skill, and instead of doing it in the obvious way, the conversation that's been ongoing for the last multiple years, and nerf the top players by removing a lot of the add-ons and weak auras and TBM and stuff like that, they're like, wait, why don't we just baseline add in a lot of this stuff to help the noobs? And that way players don't have such a disparity in the skill gap, and that way we can create content that's appealing to more players. Guessing that's their thought process. To me, as a longtime WoW player, despite that thought process somehow like making a bit of sense, it still feels like some type of violation. Like, am I crazy here? Like, I feel like it's like some type of violation to have a button that's gonna cast the next best thing for you. I still feel like it's just something about it feels like violating what it means to play an MMO. You know, it literally already exists. No, it doesn't. So Hakili, as far as I know, doesn't press the next optimal button for you. It just highlights what you should press, but you still have to press it. They're adding in a singular button that will do the next best ability in your rotation, of course, at the GCD penalty. So you'll never like top parse with it by never, right? Because it's 20% slower basically. But the single button thing is novel.
Play a new spec for the first time or haven't played it in years, it often feels like I've got like a 30-minute checklist of, okay, I got to set up my keybinds, got to make sure, oh, this ability's changed since 2 expansions ago, I got to rebind that. And then I got to go and read some guides and figure out how all my new rotation works, and oh, here's how the new set bonus works. So I could see it being really nice to just have this is a way to jump into some content to do with your friends and have it work out nice and easily. One thing that jumps out to me is that a lot of the content I'd want to do would be like delves or keys. And in either of those cases, there's a lot of AoE.
Yeah.
Is this gonna have are we gonna detect whether we're fighting 3 targets, 5 targets, and is it gonna cast my Arcane Explosion instead of my Arcane Blast, or is it just always going to be a single target?
It's not just single target. There is, some sense of, how many enemies are within your range, in front of you, etc. And so that will affect the recommendations. Again, the goal is not optimal. The goal is not like this is going to, okay, everyone's always going to get perfect parses and so forth going forward. But as a baseline, this should be, it should be useful the same way that many, many people find Hakili useful today. And it really, like a lot of this, building on the foundations of the cooldown manager that just came out in 11.1.5, kind of reflects us hearing people in the community telling us that they feel like they need to seek out these third-party resources just to play the game at like a baseline effective level in competitive content. And us asking, like, is that where we want the game to be in the long term, and what can we do to build in native solutions to many of these problems?
Like the base construct of it, there is this will help you learn what you're supposed to do if you are new, and then there is hey, I don't want to be the best player at this game. That's totally fine. I play it for a different reason. I want to collect things. I want to understand the story. I want to quest. I want to level, right? And I don't want to feel like I can go into any content and I just don't really know what I'm doing. I feel anxious about that. Like you have the ability to just be like, okay, well at least Blizzard's got me. I can have something at a base level where I can press one button and just kind of hang out and play the game. I have one question about the actual rotational thing. So is that going to like change with talents? So like, let's say, is it going to work off the base talent build, or let's say you select a talent that now moves a AoE button into your single target rotation? Is it going to be smart enough or planned to be smart enough to incorporate a bunch of different potential talent builds?
The goal is that it's aware of your talents, and the logic is conditional based on what you do or don't have talented. As with, this is going to be something that continues to evolve. We may not have every single possible permutation accounted for in the version that we roll out with, but it should still be very useful in that form to everyone, and we'll just get refined from there. Similar to the cooldown manager that we know is like, that is a first take at this. We have plans to add much more customization, much more functionality to that over time as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting feature individually. The thing that's most exciting to me is in the broader context of the cooldown manager, of all these other edit mode changes that have come out. There was a time 5 years ago in WoW where if you were just getting into the game, there was an intimidating list of these are the add-ons that you need, and if you're not using these, you're kind of worse, right? Like you're noticeably worse. If you can't track your group member's major cooldown, right? Like you're worse at Mythic Plus than somebody who is, right? And it seems like the goal that has been accomplished with a lot of these things that have been coming into the base UI is you can use those add-ons if you want, but we now have a native way to the game that you don't have to get an add-on.
That is pretty much exactly our long-term philosophical goal here, right? Like, add-ons are amazing. The things that the community has done over the last 20 years to allow people to experience different aesthetics, different functionality, have information available at their fingertips, like, that is a huge part of WoW's success, and we don't question or want to undermine that for a moment. At the same time, like as you said, ideally it is about what do you want? How do you prefer to have things presented to you, and not what do you have to do? What is a group mate or raid leader or whatever telling you must download? Or if you ask people, hey, how can I get better? Or, I'm really struggling at this. The first answer shouldn't be, well, download this add-on, this add-on, and this add-on, otherwise you're doing it wrong. Because that's starting to get into that mandatory place, whether we like it or not. So yeah, I think, longer term, these initiatives kind of fit into part of how we're thinking about the role of add-ons in WoW. As we can probably all agree today, there is a sense that if you want to really be the best you can, if you want to play competitive content, there are certain add-ons that are required, that are simply going to improve your success over not having them. We would like to get away from that being the case. I think I'd love to see a WoW one day where you can still customize the aesthetic look of your UI, you can have information and quest helpers and all the other things that you might want to have to make your experience a bit more seamless. But that at the end of the day, when you're in competitive content, when you're queuing up for a rated PvP match, when you're going into a high key, when you're trying to get a first kill on a raid boss, there isn't the sense that you are, just holding yourself back if you're not using specific tools. We know that there's a lot of work to do to get to a place where that could be the reality. The first steps really are going to be continuing to build up the just right out of the box functionality that World of Warcraft offers to shrink that gap. But at the same time, I think we're aware that at the very end of this process, we probably are going to have to rein in some of the functionality that add-ons currently have to do like real-time in-combat problem solving specifically, where it's like automating coordination, communication in ways that are always going to be better than anything the UI could natively provide you, as long as they remain possible.
Yeah, so that moves.
Okay, I'm squirming over here, man. I'm squirming, dude. Like I said, I'm trying to stay as open-minded as possible and just trying to understand, because I'm not the normal player by any means, right? Like, I don't represent every person that plays WoW. I'm like the niche of a niche, right? So it's not like making me happy is WoW's goal. It's trying to make as many people happy as possible, so that people enjoy playing the game, and I get that. But I'm still squirming trying to understand. Right, I really am. I guess at a competitive level, no one really uses Hakili anyway, because you need to be so good at your rotation where, you don't even need to think about it, right? And at a competitive level, you wouldn't use the autocast thing anyway, because it's 20% slower GCDs, so you wouldn't be able to parse anyway. So at a high level, this doesn't actually do anything. So this really, all it's really doing is adding accessibility and helping newer players or noobs be able to do a bit more DPS. That's really what it's doing. I don't know. To me, all I can say is this: it still feels like some type of violation. That's like the best way I can say it, right? It still feels like some type of weird violation to have the auto cast thing in. That's like all I can say is it feels like it's just like what's going on there. I will say this: it feels like in some sense World of Warcraft isn't developing. How do I say this? Like we're fighting modernity is what it seems like is what's happening, right? Because you go back like 10 years ago and you look at the players and the API was generally the same and the add-ons just didn't exist yet. So you go back and like Mists of Pandaria or something or Warlords of Draenor, and people across the board used way less add-ons, like way less add-ons, especially in PvP, but also in PvE. And you think why? And it's really that they weren't developed yet. And if they were developed, people probably would have used them. So this add-on creep issue is really because the developers are getting so good at making add-ons that now it's like, this add-on's so good to have, you should actually probably have it, because if everyone else does and you don't, you're actually just at a disadvantage. And that's kind of creating the issue, right? So it's like this modern human problem more than like a World of Warcraft specific problem. And I think we have a lot of these same conversations with like AI and like tech and like VR and all this kind of stuff of like how far is too far. It's really like the same broader conversation, which is a really tough one, right? Really, really tough one, especially with something like AI in the workforce, but I'll definitely will shelf that for now. But yeah, it's like the same thing of like, it's kind of that same conversation of like, how much do you actually want to automate versus how much do you want to leave for humans to have some type of artful expression? And I feel like the thing that feels weird, I think, about it is it's a video game that you're playing for fun, and now you're outsourcing the damage rotation so that you can actually play it. And then it's like, well, then why are you playing in the first place? But I guess the answer to that could be something along the lines of people play for different reasons. Like Max said, if you're a collector, you don't care about damage. You never cared about damage. You'll never care about damage. So it's like, let me just outsource that part of my gameplay so that I can be a collector and focus on that. And like, I guess that kind of makes sense, right? Once again, guys, I'm kind of thinking out loud here and speaking out loud here while I'm trying to really understand and wrap my head around this stuff. Like I'm trying to form a conclusion that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, once again, still, I'm spinning, I'm struggling, I'm squirming. Just keep listening.
Us into like raid bosses where I don't want to name any names, but there are people who have optimized a little bit of their own fun out of the game sometimes. I don't know where any of them might be sitting. They could be anywhere. They could be in this room with us.
Hey man, I am the like number one. Let's just YOLO this. Let's just do the fight. Let's make it work. And then sometimes it gets to let's try to make something that could be 95% successful, 100 or 99, right? And there's a lot of frustration with the tech involved with that. I would definitely be. I think a lot of the rating community would be pretty for that. I think a well-designed mechanic that the game giving you enough information to solve this on your own realistically. A lot of the times the community will just use one because it's like what everyone else uses, it gets you in the same place. But if that doesn't exist and the game is giving you that information, it's objectively better, right?
And even if you are doing it very well, manually, it's always going to be better to do it perfectly in a competitive situation. I mean, having watched, your raid leading, for example, over many, many years over the race to world first, like years ago, you would call much more stuff verbally.
Very
like
true.
Going back to, Legion, BFA era, whereas nowadays it seems like if there is something you're calling repeatedly on attempts, the first thing you're doing is asking if, hey, can we automate this and get me out of the business of talking, which seems like it might be less enjoyable for you as a raid leader.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, if we're talking about that, I could talk all day about that. Yeah. No. I mean, I felt like you certainly had more of an impact when you had the ability to, influence the fight more. But the reality is just getting some way to automate it for your players is just better. It is funny. Like when I do that now, I think, well, what else can I be doing with my time? I could be like looking at other ways to optimize, and it's purely for the sake of getting better. So yeah, for my own enjoyment, yeah, that's sweet. Let's do that. I'm trying to.
For my own enjoyment, it's a video game, right? Are we all listening to the same thing? Are my headphones doing the same thing yours are? Like, this is what we just talked about. Like, if we want the game to be fun for more people, and we're talking about enjoyment and we're talking about fun, then having the more hands-off approach where you have to really figure things out should be what a video game is all about. Maybe I feel like I'm with Max there, right? Like, that's, for me, when I raid, I don't like to download big wigs. I don't like to download DBM. I like to completely minimize weak auras and go in raw, go in full natty brah. You know what I'm saying? You go in there and you're just like, what's happening in this encounter? And then pull after pull, you start to learn it and you start to learn your timings. And to me, that process is what makes the game fun. I
wonder also about those kind of mechanics. So like what bosses have existed in my head, I think in the past couple of years, there's not many, but have been defined by when we're progressing this boss, we feel like maybe we're progressing a weak aura. Something like Brood Twister or Echo of Neltharion or Jailer maybe was one of the first ones, right? And those mechanics, I feel like, could not have been done or probably would have been nerfed without weak auras or having that effectiveness of that reduced. What do you do as a fight designer now? Do you, I know you're obviously like really passionate about raiding, you've raided for a really long time. What do you have to avoid those kind of assignment mechanics? Are there things in game you can use to like naturally sort out those things? Like do you give more time for the mechanics? Like do you have to stray away from assignments in general because the community has just, whether you like it or not, has like trained themselves to have something solve that for them? Do you have to like go back into like a more simple version of that? Do you find other ways to make fights difficult? There's obviously a bunch of ways to do that.
The way we design encounters has been influenced in significant ways by the way players use add-ons. I know, the community sometimes speculates that, this was built clearly to require an add-on. I can say that's never the case. No encounter designer is ever sitting around saying, all right, we're going to make this mechanic and then players will write this weak aura to solve it this way. All right, mission accomplished, let's ship the boss. But when we're thinking about the overall pacing of a fight, the tuning, we might get feedback on a fight that it feels like there isn't enough going on, when in actuality, there are 4 or 5 mechanics going on, but add-ons are largely compartmentalizing and making it so that most players don't have to think about them most of the time. And then players give us feedback that, hey, this fight felt a little bit slow, like I was just punching the boss for 3 minutes. And so then maybe we add another mechanic in the next iteration of that or a similar encounter. We get to a higher overall complexity space where, there's just, you look at the dungeon journal and you're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and maybe half of it doesn't even matter because add-ons are going to handle it for you. I think that's not a great place for things to land. It also definitely ties our hands in some ways. Like, I think we do fewer coordination mechanics than we used to. Like, there used to be, if you look at old school WoW days, there were encounters where, the primary challenge for your raid was by design coordinating some rotation. And the execution beyond that wasn't super complicated, but making sure that this thing stayed soaked or that, you were rotating people through with their debuff or whatever, that became a big part of the fight's challenge. Now we know ultimately that that can never be the thing that we lean on for challenge because it's going to be solved, and it's not going to be solved through what we think of as the more just interesting MMOE communication, cooperation, figuring out systems for having these things work in a way that feels collaborative. It's going to be downloading the weak aura pack, setting it up appropriately.
Yeah, dude, am I crazy? I feel like I'm crazy here. That's what players like. The coordination and the collaborative effort. Ian knows it, he just said it, right? That's the fun part. All right, hold on, let me just hypothetically here. We have 2 options. You have the good players, you have the noobs. Would you guys rather see what they're doing now is option 1, where you bring the noobs up by adding in all of these add-ons kind of baseline, the Halikis, the rotation assists, so that you have the gap smaller? Or would you rather have option 2, where you nerf the API so that weak auras, deadly boss mods, bigwigs can't access as much as the API, so they can't see what's happening next in the combat log and stuff like that? You'd still have add-ons, you'd still be able to move things on your screen, you'd still be able to, have buffs and debuffs shown, but you wouldn't access as much as the API, so you can't actually read what is happening next from the boss and stuff like that. Would you guys rather have option 1 or option 2? So 3 would be both. 2, for me, I'm probably more of a 2. Once again, I'm a super minority here, so I'm not saying I have the right answer necessarily, right? I'm saying from my perspective as a player, I think I would enjoy 2 more. I think I would enjoy the game with less deadly boss mods, bigwigs, weak auras, and you have more of a player-to-player collaborative effort where you're talking, communicating, coordinating these things out loud. You have raid leaders like Max just said a few minutes ago, where they're very involved. This person moves here because you can't have a weak aura that automates that. And instead of progression, looking as you're progging your weak auras and progging the add-ons, you're progging the players themselves. To me, that seems pretty clear cut, right? I don't know.
Really, maybe having 3 or 4 frustrating wipes because there was a typo in the configuration, which is that's not what I think anyone really wants rating to be. And so we move away from making those mechanics as much and lean more on things that add-ons can't solve for you, like moving out of a swirly under your feet with only a little bit of time to respond. I don't think it's a coincidence that more and more of our fights have those sorts of just
That's
twitch
fair,
reaction avoidance mechanics, whereas that used to be one type of fight that we did. The design space is definitely constrained by the knowledge that, if we lean on it too heavily, it's just going to get trivialized.
That makes a lot of sense.
Some of my favorite WoW raid boss memories are bosses like Mythic Unat, Mythic Anduin. You have to spread out and then you get these marks and you have to go to the right places. And there used to be definitely a library of mechanics like that where you would get them and then you'd have to think and you'd have to have a system and you'd have to have 20 players sort of coordinate and become one team that does a mechanic like that. And the fact now that add-ons take on much of that job of coordinating us, I think that almost all the Mythic Raiders I know would be delighted to move back to a world where we did that in our brains, right?
Dude, that's exactly what I just said. I think a lot of the top players would be happy to go back to where things were, to nerf the add-ons. And I think, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but a lot of the noobs, the newer players that are getting into it would also be happy with that because it would lower the skill discrepancy. Wouldn't that just be a win? Who doesn't want this? I feel like a lot of the top players in PvP want this, a lot of the top players in PvE want this, and I think a lot of the noobs would want it too. I think, am I crazy? Nerfing add-ons seems like a good choice here. Maybe I'm misinformed, but yeah, it seems like it would be more intelligent problem solving from the PvE perspective to have the add-ons nerfed, and if that's what the players want too.
But in Dragonflight, we saw a little bit of an attempt to make that happen, right, with the private aura system. And what ended up happening was we still had the weak aura, but now we also have a macro that we need to press, and then the weak aura will assign us the same thing. So I'm a little bit worried. How's the arms race between the weak aura devs trying to come up with a new way around the restriction that you're putting in? Is this just a further escalation in that?
Hopefully not. I think our goal here is kind of disarmament and definitely not further escalation. I think we understand that if we're not going to try more little targeted things like that are going to encourage workarounds, and it just ends up with this back and forth. Because if there is a way to solve a complex mechanic, but you have to jump through a couple of more hoops to do so, you'll do that, right, and then just be more annoyed by the process. Our goal is to try to get out of that space entirely, and so I think down the line eventually, that may mean, I think, some broader restrictions on specifically what information add-ons have access to about combat events in real time. At the same time, we know that that's not a thing that we could just do right now without providing a lot more on our end, both in terms of just UI type functionality, but also looking at how we're designing some encounters, how some of our classes work. I think there are tons of add-ons that are healthy and valuable and really important to how players play the game that do rely on that flow of information. Everything from something as simple as damage meters to honestly boss time, ability timelines, the DBM style, when is this next ability going to fire that people have basically been raiding with forever. That's not the computational weak auras, that's just, hey, this ability is gonna happen in 15 seconds. We wanna build in our own version of that. I think down the line, we'd love to see a place where
For someone who doesn't like to raid or do any PvE with add-ons, what I really appreciate is never needing a timer. And what that means is having some type of in-game visual when a mechanic is about to happen. And of course, if you do 50 pulls on a boss, then you start to learn it anyway. You start to think, okay, I should probably hold my cooldown here because the boss is about to transition because I just pulled this boss 50 times and I know exactly when it's about to happen. And I think that's the beauty of it, right? But I always appreciate when there's a dialogue, like the boss yells or the boss, say there's about to be an explosion, the boss huddles down and glows red, and it's okay, there's going to be explosion, so you don't need a timer because you can see it because you're playing a video game where there's a type of feedback that you can actually play the game and see for yourself. I always appreciate that. And it seems like it's like that most of the time. And if you miss something, it's like, well, that's on you then. And if you want to download an add-on to make it easier, then that's what people do anyway. But I'm trying to think, there's some fights where you kind of just need a timer. And if you don't have the timer, you're kind of just like, I'm trying to think of a fight where you just like kind of need a timer. Like Ragnaros and Molten Core for ins and outs, you can do it without the timer because you can see when Rag yells. But if you're not out in time, you kind of just die too, especially on hardcore. So like that's maybe an example where like you kind of do want the timer there. I'm trying to think of something else where like you just need that timer or you're just screwed. Anyway, my point being is I really like when boss encounters you can do it without any add-ons completely fine. But if you want to be the top of the top of the top of the top and min-max absolutely everything, it's like, sure, get the timer then. But like, you don't need the timer if you didn't want it. Like that's I like that visual cue where you can interact with the game. Think of like, and some people in the chat said this earlier, but think about like Elden Ring if it had weak auras. Elden Ring, I think, has great combat. I think we can all agree there. They have great boss fights, great combat. If Elden Ring weak auras existed, where it said like, boss transitioning in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, roll now. Oh God, I'm shuddering. Right? Oh, that would just be, and I feel like WoW is kind of getting to that spot. So once again, I feel like I would rather bring down the capacity of the add-ons to where people are playing the game and looking at their screens and figuring it out again. To me, that would be awesome. And it sounds like a lot of PvEers would want that too, and PvPers. So once again, I think that's more of the side of the fence that I'm on.
There is a boss timeline as just part of the encounter UI, and that's not something you need an add-on for. That way we can hopefully eventually get to a point where we're really just cutting out the weak aura that solves the mechanic for you, but not the informational stuff that you feel like, it really feels like the game should have been telling you all along, where add-ons are, admittedly, kind of filling in some gaps there.
Okay, so coming in 11.1.7, we're going to have the rotation helper, those two options. What of the rest of this initiative, is any of the rest of this in 11.1.7, or are we just starting the conversation now?
I think there's a lot of stuff that we're working on. I think, we've seen the cooldown manager and then the rotation assist coming. I think down the line, it's some of the stuff that I touched on. I don't have specific patch dates right now, but we are looking at damage meters. We're looking at nameplate improvements.
Damage meters.
We are looking at, like a raid encounter information presentation that shows you timeline of boss abilities coming up.
Oh my gosh.
Things in that general space. I think we're looking at all the places where players say right now, you need this weak aura, you need this add-on to be competitive, and asking ourselves, like, how do we change our game to make that not the case? And some of that's going to be add-on functionality, or UI functionality. Other aspects are going to be looking at how we're building some encounters or how some class mechanics work. Like, I think it's super fair to point at some specs, like let's say Outlaw Rogue, who I know are easy one to pick on in some of these ways, and ask like, how is anyone really supposed to execute this perfectly with the base UI? Almost any time we're tracking like stacks of a buff, and you need to make a decision where it's like, if you're between 4 and 7 stacks, you should do this, otherwise don't. Those are not reasonable tests for us to be posing to our players.
Bro, whenever I watch Peekaboo, I always wonder how he does DPS. Because he doesn't use weak auras or any add-ons like that. And I thought of that same thing. Like, I got into PvE at the start of War Within, and I was trying to do like, high keys and mythic rating and stuff, and it occurred to me very quickly that like, you need to track your stacks, you need to track all of your buffs and debuffs, and you need to do it very, very well if you want to be at the top or if you want to do a lot of damage, right? Like, you just have to. That's just how the game operates. And like, if you're not tracking these things, like, how are you doing any damage at all, right? Like, you basically need them,
without providing them the information to do it correctly. And so we need to either provide the information, simplify the mechanic, or both.
There are a lot of players who love the version of Outlaw Rogue that it has existed over the past few years. So I think there's always some fear when this discussion starts up of, is the answer going to be to simplify everything? And I think it's really exciting to hear instead that the answer is, okay, we'll maybe simplify some of these huge outliers, but we're going to bring in the functionality that makes it so that instead of needing to download a weak aura to solve this, right, instead of needing to have a complicated assistant tell you, now you're supposed to press this button, now you're supposed to press this button, instead we're going to provide that information in a more clear way than looking at the top right of your screen to see your buffs and trying to catch the rotation buff between all the other 20 that are changing in combat.
That's definitely the goal. I think we want World of Warcraft to be as approachable as possible, but we also love that the skill ceiling in the game is as incredibly high as it is. That allows for tons of differentiation and self-expression and accomplishment. But I think a lot of, at its core, a lot of skill in WoW I think boils down to multitasking ability. And like even just, you might be able to do amazing damage just testing it against a target dummy. Very different world when you're also in an encounter and need to do 3 mechanics at the same time. And we see, tunnel visioning DPS are a meme for a reason, right? They're just focused on their rotation and whoops, they just messed up the encounter mechanic, or vice versa. Someone who is good at mechanics, but their DPS goes off a cliff. Really, like the function of a lot of these add-ons is to offload a portion of that computational complexity. And we recognize, like, if we are removing some of that functionality, we're providing more information, we can probably remove a couple of mechanics, but still keep the same level of challenge. The goal is not to make it easier. The goal is to make it less complex. And I think that's, a key distinction there, because I think it often can sound like, oh, this is about, this might be about dumbing down the game or simplifying things. It's not that. It's about trying to create a more approachable baseline experience that still has every bit as much room for differentiation.
When you were talking about add-ons that things have been in the game, been inspired by it, you mentioned a damage meter.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in just what your view is philosophy-wise about damage meters in games like this.
That's a great question. And I think ultimately we have to be guided by what our community prefers and what we see them doing today. The single most popular add-on used across the entire game is a damage meter by like a fair margin.
Yeah.
The majority of
makes
players,
sense.
the large majority of players, have a damage meter add-on installed. And so that indicates that people want to see that information at least about.
Okay, someone in the chat said something that I was gonna say, but I didn't want to like trigger anyone, especially the PvEers in here. But let's say it because someone in the chat said it. Someone said, I would love simpler rotations and harder fights with less weak aura help. Real Sophist. I would love simpler rotations, harder fights with less weak aura help. To me, I completely agree with you. Completely agree with you, right? I think rotations and the complexity of like Kata or like Mop, where they're not stacking like 600 buffs, you're stacking like 3 or 4, maybe 5, but you're not trying to stack like 12 different mechanics at once. You're stacking like, 3 mechanics at once. So like you'll put like your unused trinket on with like Incanter's Ward on at the same time as like a proc trinket and a shatter combo. So that's like 4. Instead of trying to stack up like 20 different abilities. So like simpler rotations, but harder fights with less weak aura help. So the mechanics are what makes the fight interesting, not the rotation. The mechanics are what makes the fight interesting. The movement, the fight itself, reading the boss, and you have this dance, not the rotation. Once again, let's talk about Elden Ring for a second. Elden Ring, you only really have roll, attack. I mean, you have a couple different types of attack, like a jump attack. You have like a light and a heavy. So there's like a couple different types of attacks, but it's not like there's like 60 attacks or 60 keybinds, but and I'm not saying WoW should be Elden Ring, but I'm saying Elden Ring has good combat and it's engaging. So what can we learn from that, right? Take things from different disciplines and bring them into to other disciplines, right? So it's like, okay, so you have these simple rotations that are not complex, but you have enjoyable, difficult fights. To me, that's what I would love. It sounds like, if we speak very clearly, a lot of the PvE crowd would get behind it, but I think it scares people to say simpler rotations. I think this is like a knee-jerk reaction of like, no. But I think if you explain it fully, I think people would actually enjoy it. Am I out of touch here? Are Sophist and I out of touch? Do you guys agree with me or disagree? Because this seems to me a great solution. Out of touch. I agree. Hard agree. Disagree. Disagree, agree, I like it, agree. Be honest, if you disagree, be honest. Agree, 100%, agree. Okay, so like from my perspective, one of the things that made something like TBC so great or Wrath so great or Kata so great is that the rotations themselves weren't completely so complex, but in the fights for the time period were, right? So you had easy rotations to add complex encounters. And the same is true, and I've made this argument before, in PvP. So in my opinion, one of the things that makes for really good PvP, and just hear me out, is more simple rotations, kind of how it was in TBC, Wrath, Kata. Very, very, very complex, like macro thought when it comes to PvP. So positioning, communication, burst windows, cooldown, stuff like that. But the complex rotations, at least in PvP, I can speak of it from the PvP side with a bit more knowledge base than I can from the PvE side. From the PvP side, I would say that complex rotations kill PvP a bit, right? Because you are now just trying to do your complex rotation versus having this dance, so to speak, with an easier rotation, but with more of a complex and dynamic fight. And you can't really have one without giving or taking away from the other. I didn't mean to like pause so long there, but that's a really complex thought there.
Themselves. We definitely want more nuanced measures of success and understanding like how successful were you or how much did you contribute on this run, highlighting things like interrupts, highlighting things like avoidable damage to give a fuller picture of performance. But at the end of the day, you know, I think for someone who's trying a new spec, trying a new talent build, getting a new trinket, and they want to see like how did this affect my performance compared to the last run, that's an important piece of information to have. And so I think, you know, we know that in any world where we were going to limit some of the ability of add-ons to like, again, do that real-time combat event tracking, we would need to provide a damage meter solution of our own. And I think one of the exciting things is I think if we're doing that on our end, we can also have it be server authoritative, so you're not worried about like who's in a different combat phase, who's out of range or whatever. Yeah. It could just be like, this is official and going to be accurate all the time.
We're obviously mostly thinking about Mythic Raid when our brains go to how this is going to affect things, but the overwhelming majority of players are in, you know, heroic raids, normal raids, raid finder raids, doing Mythic Plus dungeons, right? When we're talking about making these changes to what WeakAuras can do, is there an appetite for changing how heroic and normal raids function as well? Like, do we see these problems in there as well for what add-ons can do and how they solve things?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it all trickles down, right? I mean, I think maybe even more, a larger percentage of players doing Mythic Raid might use specific WeakAura packs than, let's say, normal. But those add-ons are used by the majority of players right now, and certainly other, you know, boss mods are as well. And I think a lot of it just comes down to, you know, what are the coordination challenges that we're presenting? If there's something that everyone is relying on a tool right now to assist with, we would have to change it to still keep it the same level of challenging, but, you know, without that same automation assistance. And that can take many forms. It can be there's one or two fewer things to soak. You have an extra couple of seconds to like actually spread out on the fly. You know, it's a pretty common mechanic of like, all right, 3 people get a debuff and they just have to like run out in different directions from each other. People have been just kind of playing the game and doing those for years and years. But of course, if you can like, if the time you're given to react is so tight that you can't afford to do that, then people do gravitate towards, all right, we're gonna put diamond, circle, and triangle on the ground, everyone's gonna get an auto-assigned marker, and you just know like, I'm gonna run to my marker to guarantee that it's executed correctly. I think it's a bit more interesting if we give you a couple of seconds so that you can look around and make sure you're not running in the same direction, and then do the exact same thing. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, raiding in particular, definitely. But you know, group PvE, group PvP too, like in an MMO, a huge portion of, I think, the fun of it is just coordination, communication, feeling like everyone's working together to overcome some challenge in front of them. And I think getting back into a space where there's room for more of that organic collaboration as opposed to it just being like regimented and solved.
He just said it. How do you increase organic communication between players, right? Like how do you actually do that? Well, you reduce the task load by making the rotations more complex and the fights harder, right? Like that's what we just had the conversation about. To me, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe I'm on pure cope here. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but to me, that seems like that would just own, right? You don't have people trying to min-max every darn detail with like these crazy rotations. You simplify that and add the complexity in other ways where people wouldn't. Yeah, I don't know.
By an external tool, I think like will open up a lot of design avenues for the game going forward.
Throughout the last couple years, especially in Mythic Plus, that had been ramping in complexity, you've seen, and actually if you can go back, like you can see the amount of things that people have in their UI to help them know that something's happening. So like back in Power Auras, it was, there was just some giant, some giant face on your screen would pop up, and that meant that something procced. And then it's gotten more, refined. And now, even in it's been ramping in the past couple of years. You see like, you listen to someone's POV who's doing High Mythic Plus right now, you're gonna hear AoE, dodge, frontal, circle. Yep. Like it's just every bit of audio aid they've used it's in the idea of being optimal, it's not required. And especially this patch, I think Mythic Plus complexity has actually gone down as an intentional design point, it seems at least. I think you might have made a post about that. So that stuff is less required, but people have like kind of already baked down the UI. Is that something that you're looking to either have an ability to have that in the game, or is that something you don't want to have happen, where it's more like you're organically doing mechanics because you see them, or are you okay with all of the audio and visual aids that exist currently within add-ons?
I think the answer is mixed there. I think like audio prompts are something that are super valuable to people. That's something we want to continue to add support for on our end as well. Like we know feedback we've gotten around the 11.1.5 cooldown manager would be that many people would appreciate being able to have audio prompts tied to certain things or procs firing, and that's something they would miss about weak auras. We want to make sure that we're offering that kind of thing as well. Beyond that, I think a lot of what we've seen is, frankly, us not doing a sufficiently good job of telegraphing the importance of certain mechanics and their impact, and players needing to come up with solutions for them externally.
I think that was really well said, and I enjoy the humility there from Ian. If all of these things were kind of teleprompted, the boss really was really, there was an obvious mechanic where it was happening. You wouldn't really need an add-on saying this is happening in 5, 4, 3. Like you could literally see that it's happening in 5, 4, 3. To me, that's always the solution, right? Like if you can have this encounter that feels like a dance without needing the assistance of, these outside supports, I think that's like for sure the answer. But obviously, it seems to be that they're already trying that, and it's not super easy.
Ideally, there's a concept that we call affordance, which is basically just how well is something telegraphed, how intuitive is it with visual presentation, and ideally, the affordance of a mechanic should match its impact.
Right. Yeah.
And sometimes, if you have a random mob in a dungeon pack that has a frontal that will just delete you if you're not getting out of the way of it, and it's just one thing going on among a half dozen other things, why? And why? Like, how could we call that out better with visuals, with a longer cast time, with how we're creating the pack in the first place?
Yeah, that's fair.
And that's just one example of one of the areas in which we know we can do better. Something else we've talked about on the UI front is we would want the ability to, on our end, flag mob casts in Mythic Plus as like lethal, as like this should be a high priority interrupt, because we know players are going to basically look to solve that anyway. If there are 3 casters in a pack, and 2 of them, it's actually kind of okay to let them free cast, but one of them, if they ever get a cast off, you're probably going to wipe. They shouldn't all just look indistinguishable on your screen, and us expect you to figure that out on your own.
They did that in season 1.
That's awesome. I actually really like that. I really applaud that, because that was one of the things, like getting into Mythic Plus at the start of Orathin, that I found surprising. So basically, oh man, I wish I could find this conversation on Discord. I can maybe look for it, but it's going to take a second. Basically, in Warathan at the start of the expansion, there was certain mobs, and this is just true it's not just Warathan, true in Mythic Plus in general. There's certain mobs that are mobs that you have to look out for and pay very close attention and interrupt. And you can download an add-on that will basically mark those mobs with a different color. A lot of people use... What's the add-on people use for that? Like color-coded plates. Plater. There's another one. I guess Plater's the one. I never actually downloaded Plater, but I downloaded something else that was very similar. And anyway, if you don't have an add-on telling you what mobs are important and which mobs aren't important, and I'm trying to find this Discord DM, but I can't really find it. If you don't have that add-on kind of telling you, okay, this is really, really, really important to kick, let's mark this with pink or whatever color, so you know exactly like this is high prio and this one's not, like then you would never actually know. So how do you actually figure that out? Well, you would just Google it. You'd go to Wowhead. You would watch a YouTube video. You would figure it out and then color code it and then queue. That's not good. Right, I'm still trying to find this DM because I found it really funny. What was one of the guys' name that made those Plater profiles, guys. It wasn't Quasi. It wasn't Vesp. Yeah, Vesperal. All right. You guys want to see this? I figured it out. So this is perfect. He sent me an entire Google Doc, and the Google Doc has every enemy, what they cast, and if it's a high priority target or not, and which casts are actually high priority. In my opinion, something like this shouldn't need to exist, right? Like Ian just said, and I really applaud him for it, that this is a failure of the mechanic itself looking and feeling scary enough to be like, okay, let's interrupt that. It shouldn't just be, oh, this ability one shot, so let me code an add-on to like warn me whenever it's casted. That's the problem that we should be looking at. And Ian just said that. So like, I really, really, really applaud that. I think that's amazing. That's awesome. That's a +1 for me.
One, right? Wasn't there like a couple casts or like super giga you die death volley or something?
Yeah.
And they had this big animation.
The Arcara casters where they hunker down, there's green glowy stuff around them, and they're casting a volley, and you're like, all right, I gotta kick
You'd
that.
be playing WoW for 2 days, and you're like,
That's not happening,
that can't happen. Yeah.
Right.
But
exactly.
I'm looking forward
That's good.
to an M+ then where if we're talking about maybe taking away my ability to air horn myself on a certain cast, something like that, if instead I have to be now looking at a mob and there is a sort of a visual language that I can come to expect, like if the mob is hunkering down and it's got particle effects around it, that means I gotta kick it. I think that would be more fun for everybody as well, rather
that'd
than
be amazing.
having the air horns be the solution.
That's
Definitely.
solid.
That is entirely our hope, right? I think, and just to be super clear, I think we see the taking away part, the restricting functionality, as the end of this long road. I think we know, we want to make it very clear, we're not sitting here being like, all right, we want you to play the game the way we intended, and we're going to take away your tools. We just want to bridge that gap. And we have a lot of work to do on our end to keep building up more improvements, more functionality. And it's not just the UI. The VFX changes that you mentioned are a part of that overall effort of us asking, what are the places where players feel like they need add-ons to succeed? Why is that the case? And when it's like, it's not clear when you're standing in something, and so I need, GTFO or some other, sound effect to let me know that I'm standing in something lethal, it should be obvious, let's fix that on our end. And we know we want to keep chipping away at those things.
To me, that's the solution, right? It's not let's bring add-ons to everyone. It's let's make it so that you don't need add-ons. I love this half of the conversation way more than I love the first half of the conversation, right? To me, this is the right angle to hit it from. It's like, great. And it sounds like they're trying to do both. But yeah, that first half.
And hopefully eventually get to a point where really the only difference between what we are offering and what powerful add-ons can do is that small subset of like computational problem-solving stuff, at which point we can move forward.
So throughout the evolution of private auras, we've seen, initially when they came out, they were like kind of, a lot of friction was involved. And then I think they were done really, really well in a couple of cases, starting in Amir Drasil, where they were a mechanic like P1 Fire Act. You had the circles you had to quickly spread out for. They were pretty fast, but they were too fast to use a macro for it. And it basically forced the players into something they would have used a weak aura for, to just do the mechanic normally. And like, are there lessons you've learned there of like, this is actually how we can design mechanics or kind of assignment things going forward? And then also, is this, if done successfully, would this also remove private auras as what would have been, I guess, kind of a temporary solution to the weak aura problem?
Yeah, we've definitely learned a lot from how private auras have rolled out. Certainly we understand that if we're ever using it on something that like is on a long enough time frame that macros are going to let you solve it and it's punishing enough to not solve it, all we're doing is creating an extra annoying hoop to jump through, and we like hot fixed off the private aura designation from some of those back in Amir Drasil, and we've let that shape how and where we use or don't use it going forward. And so yeah, I think examples like the Farak mechanic that you mentioned are ones where like when we know that everyone is in a level playing field, everyone just has to play the game, play the mechanic. We can tune it accordingly so that it's hard but doable. We'd like to be able to do more of that for sure.
Yeah, I see the Firac first intermission, which was a private aura and then had to get hotfixed off of the private aura, as sort of a cautionary tale for if there's a mechanic that is only doable with the weak aura assignments, and then we take away that without giving an adequate replacement, then it's worse than doing nothing at all. What would a mechanic like that look like in a world where we don't have a computational solution to it, right? Would it be slower and fewer sets of like lower damage numbers on these things?
I think probably a bit of all of that. There's multiple knobs there. There's, on Mythic we might default to like everyone in today's world, everyone in the raid has to participate in this, and there's enough things to be soaked that if anyone isn't doing it, it's not going to work out. Versus maybe shifting to a world where there's a little bit more slush, things are a little bit slower, there's a little bit more time to react, to get into place organically based on which buff you were assigned, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, our goal here is to preserve challenge, and we know that we'd have to design encounters differently in some cases to deliver roughly the same level of challenge in terms of how many pull counts it takes, just what progression looks like, while living in a different mechanical world. And I know that when we talk about restricting any kind of add-on functionality, many players very rightly, kind of reflexively say or ask, well, how am I supposed to do this boss in this tier without my weak aura? That would be impossible. And the reality is, if you couldn't use that weak aura, that mechanic would be designed or tuned differently. We would have ended up nerfing it right away or designing it differently over the course of even just PTR testing. And so that's like any future design in this space will have to be built from the ground up with that in mind. And I think it's making it a little bit more forgiving in a way that makes the challenge human rather than superhuman, as it often is when we're looking at like cutting edge mythic tuned things. Because you guys are really good at the game, as it turns out, and we want to make a boss that is going to pose a challenge and is going to take you dozens of attempts, let alone 100 plus to beat. We do have to take into account the fact that not just you, but every Mythic raid guild that's going to follow in your footsteps are going to be using these tools. And at the end of the day, I think players do want challenging bosses. That if we just tuned the boss around none of those things, players used all those tools, and they went in and like a late Mythic boss was dying in a single night for like a cutting edge guild, rank 500 or whatever, that probably doesn't match what they're looking to get out of Mythic raiding. In my estimation. And so like our goal is to keep the same overall level of challenge while paring down the complexity a little bit.
Even if you look at the history of bosses this would have affected, you actually, even looking at Mythic Plus, something where the complexity has gone down from pack to pack in this patch, but the reality is you can still find challenge in it because it's infinitely scaling, and you will get to a point where it's doing too much damage to you, or the amount of damage you need to do is too high. There's been Mythic bosses that have been simple mechanically, but have been unbelievably difficult, and that's been true all the way down the guild ranks. It's not.
I was just gonna say this. I'm gonna have him finish his thought.
Something that's just nerfed by gear, like Sludge Fist, Kaiveza, where you've created really intricate problems to solve where weak auras basically didn't matter. Halandris, you actually put a bomb timer very clearly in the game around the bomb. You did not need a weak aura for one of the hardest bosses ever, right? It's more just basically the solution for these weak auras has been just a very specific kind of assignment mechanic that it's just like, oh, it's just so much easier to do this, right? You could build in a lot of that computational stuff in game to where even if weak auras existed, you would find people just being like, I don't know, the game just kind of does it. We have players that don't use audio sounds in weak aura packs because on bosses like Skarn, on most other bosses, there's like either an in-game sound for when the bombs are actually activating or a voice line. We have 2 players in our guild that use very minimal weak auras, and they literally listen to voice lines for when mechanics are going to happen, and
Giga Chads.
It's extremely accurate, right? So I think a lot of these things are already built into the baseline game. It's just about choosing like when and how to apply them.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think your example.
So that's kind of what I was gonna suggest. And once again, I'm trying not to overstep my bounds because I haven't done historically that much PvE. I've definitely seen a lot more on the PvP side of things. I have done some Mythic raiding and some high-end M+, but obviously knowledge base is more limited. So I'm trying not to overstep here. But now that Max said it, I feel like I have the permission to. You can have a really kind of mechanically somewhat simple fight that's still really hard. Why? Well, because you still need to beat those darn damage checks and the HPS checks, so your healers have to be all at that 99th percentile or the raid dies, and your DPS all have to be in that 99th percentile or you won't beat the checks and you'll also die, and then your tanks have to be at that 99th percentile or the tanks will die. So it requires everyone to be playing very, very, very well with still more of a simple fight, and to me, as a player, that's really enjoyable. And what's nice about a system like this is 6 weeks down the road after progging, everyone's going to get more gear, and then more gear is going to make you do more damage and more healing automatically, which means 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks down the road, more guilds will clear, which is the goal, right? Like as time goes on, more guilds should eventually clear the hardest content. And the first week, the main difference is they're doing it without the gear. So everyone has to be playing at such an incredibly high level to actually take down the boss without the gear that you're supposed to have to kill the boss, right? So scaling difficulty in that way seems to me, and once again, I'll be the first one to say, a PvE newbie, seems to me to make a lot of sense.
Going back to Nathri of Sludgefist, I think is a great one, right? Like a lot of that was just practice and just learning like how to react to these situations when chained to different partners and dodging the stuff. And people were in enough situations over enough time, they kind of develop that muscle memory, that sense of planning, and eventually your guild as a whole overcomes the challenge. Compared to, let's say, the Stone Legion generals that came after it, a couple of issues there, but like one of the central mechanics that was being solved by weak auras was like, all right, there's a whole bunch of soaks that need to be covered over the course of the fight, and it's not realistic to have that like 7 to 8 soaks up simultaneously, where you need to also account for like, well, this person just got targeted by different mechanics, so they need a backup to go in and do it for them.
Yeah, so it sounds initially like it's, we're restricting what add-ons can do, but really we're opening up the universe of mechanics that can exist in a WoW boss without, because there are so many that you could think of right now where all of them would be, this is going to get solved by this, right? This is going to get solved by this. But if that's not the answer, then now the designers have all these tools back, and we can get these mechanics that maybe haven't been used since MOP because we've been weak auring them ever since, and now we get to solve them with our brains again.
And he even mentioned too, he said like, well, there's a lot of swirlies now.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, like, oh, we can always default to this and a few other things because you're not gonna solve that with weak aura, so we can add fights where that's not a thing. But you remove that, that friction of there's too many swirlies goes away. And I think there's assignment, like doing a lot of these assignment bosses without a weak aura that could work would be like really fun. Like it's fun to do that. It's fun when you have 5 people that need to soak something, like the last phase of Gallywix. There's a frontal on a side of a room and 2 people die. And right now weak aura is just like, okay, well then we're gonna assign backup. So these 2 people get a big green thing on their screen, go soak that. That is something where that fight is spread out enough where you could actually communicate that. We need 2 people on the right to back up because 2 soakers are dead. Who can do it? This person says something, this person says something. Now obviously you're not gonna have that kind of communication like heroic and normal. Maybe it won't be in comms, whatever, but in Mythic, that's perfectly reasonable, right? A lot of the things, like we could probably count honestly on 1, maybe 2 hands over the last like 4 or 5 years, how many bosses would you meaningfully would have to have a mechanic change, but they are very impactful, very memorable, and they have been purely defined by that. Are you worried at all about the communities, and this has certainly been ramping up over time, like you mentioned, even for us, we were much more just do the mechanic 4 or 5 years ago than we are now. Are you worried that there has been this built-in reliance on it that might be hard to shake when creating new raid bosses?
Absolutely, and I think that some of that gets back to us knowing that we need to really ease into this. That any world where we just kind of rip the Band-Aid off and say, all right, have fun, honestly, we're in a new world, as opposed to building up more built-in functionality, starting to have clearer visuals, simplify some mechanics, and then building counters and to have classes designed around a world where we know that this isn't possible. As long as people are set up for success, I think we'll be fine. Certainly, if we were to disable any functionality and then players went into a new tier and like we're just wiping to bosses and like they used to clear heroic comfortably and now they're like brick walled halfway through heroic, yeah, players like that will be a source of tremendous frustration. But we know that we need to avoid that by any means possible, and we have a lot of work to do before we get there.
Something that really encourages me is the ping system. That seems like such a perfect way to give us an option to identify where we're going, right? You can just ping where you're going, and then you don't have to try and communicate with words. Hey, I'm going to move over to the left 20 yards, right? I just ping where I'm going, and that opens up an ability to solve these, again, in a YOLO style, right? Rather than an assignment.
I think your guild did that.
Yeah.
So the Echo of Neltharion, right?
Yeah, we just pinged it.
Yeah, so famously, like everyone had the maps for that. Like, here's your exact spot you go, and then his guild was like, you know what? Everyone just ping your spot. Mostly it gets covered. People go to the same spot every pull. But if you see 2 pings in a spot, 1 person has to move, right? And that could largely solve a mechanic with just something that's already built into the game.
Yeah, I think and the ping system is something we've also talked about looking to improve and to like kind of broaden the sorts of things you can do with it to give people more tools to solve these problems in a coordinated way, but using their own skill and expression instead of another tool.
When I think of World of Warcraft, I'm always thinking back to when I first started playing the game, and there was this really exciting moment where I looked at it and I'm like, oh my god, I can I can make this game look however I want, right? Like I can put this here, I can have an add-on that tells me what time it is in London, what time it is in Darnassus, right? I can have all the world clocks there if I want. I can have 3 different bars at the bottom of my screen. I can do whatever I want there, and to me that's always been a strength, not a weakness of WoW.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
So
yeah.
I think there's a lot of people that disagree with me on that, but then there's also people that they hear about Blizzard thinking about restricting add-ons and they're worried about losing that. Is there any intention to go after any of that kind
Cosmetic?
of customization?
No, it shouldn't be.
Not whatsoever. And in fact, we're doing everything we can to, and we would do everything we can down the line to minimize any collateral damage to them. But the goal is anything that's cosmetic should be completely fair game.
Right.
All informational stuff that's out of combat, like again, you have RP add-ons,
Right.
help things that are tracking,
Right, yeah.
helping
That's
with
all good.
professions, tracking gathering nodes, helping you with quests, like you name it, a bunch of accessibility add-ons, all of those, like there's nothing harmful whatsoever about any of them. The only thing is at the very end of the day, once we feel like we've done enough on our end to improve baseline functionality, what we'd be looking at is the ability to parse real-time combat events in a way that drives, problem solving on the fly.
So it's kind of, we build.
To me, that's the big one, right? Like, yeah, definitely. Anything on the screen, moving elements, sure, whatever. That's just cosmetic, however you prefer it, sure. Parsing real-time combat events. I don't know, man. It seems like both of these guys, top PvEers, I know a lot of the top PvPers would appreciate it. I think beginners would appreciate it. Maybe I'm out of touch here, but I think everyone would like that. Or, okay, I shouldn't say everyone. I think a large majority of people would like that.
The scaffolding to then be able to take away the existing weak aura solutions that we have for these. How much of this is, so the thing that's excited me also about edit mode has been, it's so clearly based on what the community has learned over 20 years, right? It's like, oh, the community has revolved around this as a solution for presenting this information. Let's give them that base in the UI rather than making them download something. How much of this initiative is still going to be based on what the community says, how the community reacts, versus which of these things are already kind of locked in decisions?
I'd say basically nothing here is locked in.
Okay.
Really, my hope today is to kind of begin a conversation about that direction and what areas are welcome, what areas maybe have more to do to convince the community on, and what areas we might be wrong on and should, reconsider. Because I think at the end of the day, this game belongs first and foremost to our millions of players. We're trying to serve them as best we can in the long run. Our sense is that for many players, the feeling that they have to download and use certain add-ons in order to play the game competitively isn't really part of what's attractive about the game or healthy in the long run. And so if we can pull things back to a place where add-ons are available for those who want to use them, but people aren't feeling pressured by their groups, by just the natural demands of competition and not wanting to lose out to someone who's using more advantages, then that's going to be the healthier route in the long run.
So if I was the kind of person who wanted to write a 10-paragraph forum manifesto, this would be one of the topics to do it on, right?
Absolutely. We'll be reading, we'll be listening. I think this is a long path ahead.
All right,
And yeah, just, curious to kick off the conversation and hear how people feel about it. So Rotation Assist is coming in 11.1.7, which is going to be hitting the PTR in the very near future. Can't wait to hear people's feedback as they're able to hop on and check it out. We'll be listening closely so we can make it the best it can be for everybody. It's also been amazing to just get a chance to talk through kind of the history of add-ons in WoW, where they are today and where they might be going in the future. Thank you guys for coming out. It's really been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us here. Really looking forward to see what the community has to say about how much they want more of these casts, maybe monthly, maybe bi-weekly, weekly, whatever you guys think, put it in the comments.
Daily?
Daily? And you said it, it's not me. Thank you so much, Liz. This has been really, really awesome.
And what are the comments saying? Thanks for coming to our tour. Okay. Raid frames need an overhaul. Native replacement for weak auras. Yeah, we're 100% gearing up for a console launch. You can tell they have passion. This is the best WoW interview I can remember. I think it'd be interesting to see a no add-on server. I'm actually surprised. I thought I thought they were gonna get cooked in the comments. One of the things that I think I'm becoming more aware of is like player preference. I think what I'm learning is the ideal game that I want is no longer the ideal game that WoW is building for retail, but it is what a lot of people want. So that's good. It isn't good for me, but it's good for the people that like it, which is maybe the majority. And I think I'm coming to terms with that reality and needing to kind of let go, which sucks. But it's like, okay, yeah, if I'm the only one that doesn't like this and everyone else does, then screw me, you know, like do it anyway, right? Because it's like that's what people want. And I think I'm coming to terms slowly that like a lot of this stuff where they're pushing the game forward and forward and forward, I'm just like, I don't know that's what I want. But hey, man, if that's what everyone else wants, then I'm all for it. You know what I'm saying? Aminer, thanks for the tier 1 sub. Holy crap, that was a react. I didn't think that would take so long. That's wild. Poverty, Primin, Slay, Primin, Dragon, tier 1. Beraik, Primin, Duda, tier 1. Bose, Twitch Prime. DeThorn, Primin. Guys, if I missed your sub, thank you very much. I appreciate it. There we go. Having a streamer admit to that when normally content creators are far removed from the general perspective, that's big of you. Oh yeah, I mean, I tried to say that multiple times in this video, is that like I have a very small niche perspective. Right. I have a very, 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 very niche perspective. Almost no one has the same perspective as me because, yeah, it's like how many people are actually streaming the game for a living and play it? You know, it's completely different. Absolutely. I lost the plot when they cater to sweats in top 1%. Good to see them walking it back. I mean, yeah, I definitely have some different perspectives there. Yo, Pete, thanks for the tier 1 sub. I appreciate it. I actually think that SOT SE is a pretty good in balancing mechanics compared to difficulty. Pretty easy mechanics, but pretty hard with 20 people, but still doable. Dude, I love SOT SE. I'm a little biased, Flex, but absolutely. SOT SE is a good example of if you want to go in week 1 and kill it with 20 players, there's going to be very, very few guilds in the world that can actually do that, right? But once people get more geared, it's going to become very, very easy because the gear is going to help you crush the mechanics because everyone's going to do more damage. Everyone's going to do more healing. Everyone's going to be tankier. But week 1 without the gear, very, very few people in the world can do it. So yeah, I actually really enjoyed SE for that reason. I think they're trying to keep the game alive. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's my thought. Yeah, definitely, Flex. Imagine you have a permanent wrist injury, for example, and want to play retail for some reason. The 1-button rotation would actually make it easy to play and accessible. So you're saying like physically accessible for people. I mean, yeah, I mean, there are options for that too. Like Swifty doesn't have a pinky because of his motorcycle accident, I believe. And he got like different physical gear to help with the physical, capabilities, which I think is a completely different conversation. Man, people say the same thing every game. Devs listen to the top 1% and ruin the game. In reality, you just want everything handed to you for free. So I kind of agree with that, T Dizzy. I miss a version of the game where there was content made for the top 1%, and I know a lot of people are gonna disagree with me, but hear me out. You make content for the top 1%, not necessarily just to make the top 1% happy, but to give the rest of the players something to strive for and a reason to play the game. So just to walk back in time, back in TBC, I was a noob. I was 12 years old or 13 or whatever, and I wasn't good enough to clear Black Temple. I know the top couple percent of people were in Sunwell and Black Temple or whatever, or in Classic WoW Nax and AQ40, same thing. I knew the top players could, and it gave me something to inspect people and look and be in awe about. Like, wow, that's sick. This person has full tier 3 in Nax from Nax, or this person has Warglaze from Black Temple. Like, I'm not good enough. I'm not in a raiding guild. I don't have the capacity yet, but man, that gives me something to want to play for. And I think removing that isn't that crushing for the top 1%. I think it's crushing for everyone else. And that's the claim that a lot of people disagree with me on, but I'm totally about that. I think things to everyone hurts everyone. It doesn't hurt the top 1%. It hurts the people that are getting the thing for free because you're ruining the joy and the experience of getting that thing. You're ruining their experience of logging in, not having something, wanting it, working towards it, striving towards it, doing that journey, and then finally getting there, right? So giving it to making the content for the top 1% is helping everybody else. And that's like the point I try to drive home, and
I
it
have a friend who is
seems to
essentially
go over people's
paralyzed
heads.
from the neck down and has hit KSM and 1800 in arena every season since he started playing.
Wow, you guys are all agreeing with me.
Giga chat.
I can't believe it. Everyone's agreeing with me. Maybe I just said it differently this time, but that's kind of the point that I've always kind of said. It's like you want that hard content, not just for the people that are playing the hard content, but for the sake of for the entire ecosystem, for everybody else. Right. It's especially important for the people that don't get to do it, because it gives them a reason to continue to play. I had a friend who's essentially paralyzed from the neck down and had hit KSM and 1800. What a Chad! Let's go, man. Transmogs killed this. Nobody can tell. Yeah, I mean that's a whole different conversation. Do you think that isn't the case in current retail? I mean, kinda. So Fi, you're saying like not most people can't clear Mythic, so it gives them something to strive for, right? I think there was a difference when you started adding in difficulties, because you can do story mode and finish the story and then finish it without actually doing Mythic, and it's like, well, I don't have to do Mythic because I already did story mode. But yeah, that is kind of the case if you look at like a Mythic difficulty. Yeah, because like most players will never clear Mythic, right? Most people can't get glad mounts, but no one cares because they're too hard to get. Is that how you guys feel? Like I remember when I was a kid and I saw someone on a gladiator mount, I was like, holy crap, I need to get there one day. I remember when I was a kid and I saw someone on like a Swifzulian Tiger, where I saw someone in full tier 3, or I saw someone with a gladiator title. I remember I thought like, holy crap, I want to get there. And that's what made me want to keep playing. Well, you did, but the other 99% never did. Well, I mean, that's a necessary thing for something to feel excited and rewarding and valuable, is that 99, the number doesn't, the large majority of people can't have it, right? Because if you give things to everyone, then by definition, it's no longer rare. New players can't get that, right? Yeah. Asmongold reacts to WoW autoplay.
Is that, so the red line is the artificial one button DPS, and this is manual. If you are inside of this area here, you will be told by your raid leader, just turn on the one button mode, stop trying to play the game yourself. And if you're not in this mode and you're over here, you're going to be told to do it yourself. How the fuck? Like, these are the best players that have played the game for 20 years. How the fuck do you guys not see this obvious graph? What the hell is going on? This is crazy.
Okay.
Is that...
Okay, he's actually 100% right. So he's actually 100% right. Like if you are a noob, you will 100% do more damage spamming the one button, because even though you lose 20% of your global, you'll always have a button going. You'll always have 100% uptime, even while you're moving, even while you're thinking about the mechanic. Even with the minus 20%, there's gonna be so many people that will do way more damage with it, right? Like for sure. Yeah, but it won't affect the top players. Like the top players, no way. They're gonna, like, no way, because you would never take a 20% damage loss on it, right? Like not even close.